بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد مصدر العلوم الإنسانية ومنبع الأنوار العرفانية وباب الحضرة الأحدية وعلى آله وصحبه، واجعلنا يا مولانا بجاه عندك من خواص أهل معين. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor to be able to speak in front of the students of this beautiful institution. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, students. I'm very pleased to meet you. Dr. Samir tells me most of you already have good grounding in psychology, so I expect that you will know much more than I do about the contemporary scene, especially in this institution where work is being done and in progress. And I'm sure you know, you have been told that Islamic psychology is the kind of psychology that was designed to purify people's heart and bring them closer to Allah and His satisfaction. It was never aimed at treating the kind of malfunction that clinicians treat nowadays. And it's going to be a tough job taking the foundations of the traditional Islamic psychology and bringing out of them something that can be used in clinical practice. But I'm sure that the work in progress will eventually be fruitful and result in something that can be applied practically. Now, to very briefly outline the traditional Islamic model of psychology, let's first say that psychology comes from the psyche, which is a Greek word for the soul. It will be nafs in Arabic, it will be anima in Latin. And the soul is the middle element in a triad composed of the body, the soul, and the spirit, which is the body is the soma, the soul of the psyche, and the spirit. So we have psychology from psyche, that's from Greek, but we have spirituality from spiritus, that's from Latin. So it's a bit of a, but anyway, the spirit is something that is made of light. It's formless, it's weightless, it's not subject to time and space. Whereas the body is something that is made of mud, clay, so it's heavy, it's subject to gravity and to time and space. It's very difficult to bring these two things together. So when Allah insufflated the spirit into the body to make a Khalifa to place on earth, there had to be a third element to connect these two very different things. And that's where the soul was came into existence. Because the soul, which is the psyche we are now so fascinated with, was in fact an ad hoc production to connect the spirit to the body so that the spirit could use the body to move about in this environment of earthly life and do its job. So the soul has characters that are that resemble each of the two components. So it has a form like the body. It's not formless like the spirit, but it's a subtle form. So it is subtle, so it's nearer to the spirit by its subtlety, but it's nearer to the body because it's got forms. So the soul, what do you mean by forms in the soul? The images you have in your imagination, in your dreams. When you think, you imagine, you bring out from the memory the images of the things you think about. So these are images, but there are subtle images. They're not subject to gravity. They're not dense. They're not subject to our time and space. They're subject to the kind of duration that is appropriate for their. So in that manner, the soul is a barzakh. It's the bridge that connects the spirit with the body. Now we know that the composition of the human being is a mirror image of the composition of the large universe. So the large universe, you have a material world, which is corresponds to the body. It's heavy, made of dense material, has weight, subject to time and space and gravity. And then you have the malakut, which is the world of subtle images, which are the seven heavens and what they contain. And then you have the spiritual world, which is made of lights. It's called the light, the world of lights or world of meanings. It's formless. There are no forms, there are no images in there. That composition of the large universe is a mirror image of the composition of the human being. It's the middle section, which is the malakut, is also called the barzakh. Barzakh is something that connects two different things, which would not connect otherwise. So for us, the barzakh is the soul, which is the subject that we study in psychology. It's neither the body, which is the essential thing to live on earth, nor the spirit, which is the reality of the human being, something that is conditional on the spirit wanting to live on earth. So a psychology, a study of the psyche without spirituality is really meaningless, because the soul is something that has no importance in itself, except in its relation to the spirit and the way it acts as a bridge that allows the spirit to control the body and live with it on earth. Now, to understand a little about the spirit, you can just think about the images in your imagination, and you will immediately realize that once you're into your imagination, not out of your sense perception, that is, it's a sensory material perception, you've already transcended time and space. You're out of time, you're out of space. You're out of gravity, and you're out of weight, you're out of mass, you're out of density. So compared to the body, the soul is transcendent. And compared to the soul, the spirit is entirely transcendent. That's very important, because we tend to think in images, and we tend to apply the laws of material living on the transcendent worlds. And when we talk about the transcendent world, we're still talking about created worlds. So what about the transcendence of Allah? It's way beyond everything that we... So some people cannot take themselves out of the material dimension when they conceive of Allah and His names and attributes. Whereas already the soul transcends the body and the spirit transcends the soul. Now the soul is what allows the spirit to use the body to perceive, act, and move and affect the environment on earth. Without the soul, the spirit would be unable to fulfill its function, which is to be the Khalifa of Allah on earth. Khalifa in what meaning? Khalifa in that man was placed on earth to control it in the service of God, and through it to come to know Allah and His names and attributes. This is the purpose of man. So if he does not use his life on earth to know Allah, his life is purposeless. If you attend to the requirements of the body and forget the requirements of the spirit, it's useless. You're not doing anything. If you attend to the requirements of the soul and forget the requirements of the spirit, you're still not getting anywhere. Now, the spirit, by its nature, is attracted upward to its origin in the world of lights. The body, by its nature, is attracted downward to the earth, where it comes from. So spirit wants to go back to its origin, the body wants to go back to its origin. The poor soul is torn in between, being pulled to two sides. The people in whom the body takes control of the scene, they become controlled by their appetites, by the physical appetites. All they think about is to satisfy their physical appetites. Whereas the people who are controlled by the spirit use the soul and the body to satisfy the spirit, to help the spirit fly to its origin in the world of light in the presence of Allah. This is what makes the soul a battleground. And this is where the term jihad al-nafs comes from, because jihad is a battle between the lower drives of the soul and the upper drives of the spirit. Of course, between the extremes of somebody who is purely spiritual and is always thinking of how to get closer to Allah, and somebody who's purely physical and is thinking of nothing but how to satisfy his physical appetites, we have all the degrees. You can have 30% of that and 70% of this, and every kind of combination is present. Now, the soul in itself is not a simple thing. It's composed of a good way to conceptualize it is to think of it as made of superimposed levels. The first level will be its connection with the body in the apparatus of sensory perception. You have to.
Can I ask you a quick question, just for clarification for the students? So the soul here you're referring to as is the nafs, right?
Nafs.
The nafs. Okay.
And nafs.
Okay. Yeah. Nafs.
The psyche of psychology. So the first level is the sensory perception. Then sensory perceptions leads into physical appetites. Sensory perception is essential to perceive your environment and interact with it. However, the sensory perception does not tell you what is happening in the surrounding subtle world. Now, the surrounding subtle world is something that modern psychology does not study at all, although it has a big influence on what we do, how we think, what we feel. Because if you just stop to think for a while, and you will immediately realize that you have two guardian angels writing down your deeds. You have the angel that insufflates inspiration to do good, the angel who insufflates the good dreams during your sleep, the angels who come down during sessions of dhikr, the angels who stand at the doors of the mosque writing down your names when you enter the mosque and come out. And then you have the devil that is running through your blood and insinuating bad things and driving you to do. Now, all these you cannot see, you cannot perceive by your sensory apparatus, but they are very, very influential. And the only way to make use of the influence and protect oneself from the demonic influences is to be aware of this and follow the instructions of the Sunnah, which no psychologist will teach you. Now, above the level of physical appetites, we have the level of the emotions. We have positive emotions, negative emotions, and above the level of the emotions, we have the intelligence and the intellect. All these interact with each other all the time. And the end result, which at any particular moment will be at the center of consciousness, is most of the time what we mean by when we say the heart. The heart is the center of consciousness. So if the heart is preoccupied with spiritual things, then it will be very close to the spirit. It will be almost part of the spirit. If the heart is preoccupied with appetites, it will be close to the body. So the heart is a cup, a vessel that takes the color of whatever is filling it at this particular moment. There are other definitions and you will find a great variety in using this terminology in the works of various traditional authors. But in fact, at the end, the knowledge is one, and the terminology it changes. For instance, in some schools they call the barzakh between the material world and the spiritual world, they call it malakut. In other schools they call it jabarut. So they reverse the order. It's malakut and then jabarut, or jabarut and then malakut. But the reality it describes is one. Now, I'm sure that you can, with your knowledge of psychology, will be able to conceive of the interaction between all these elements and whatever is driving the person at any particular time. Now, the manner in which the heart is purified to reach the presence of Allah is obviously the main area of interest of the authors along the 1400 centuries of Islam, and it was the most famous and the easiest to, the most systematic was, of course, Imam Ghazali in Ihya Ulumuddin and other books. Now, as we said, this kind of psychology was never intended to treat the pathological malfunctions of the psyche. So to make use of it for clinical intervention means that we need to make a clear formulation and clarification of the principles which will form the background grid against which all practical interventions can be measured. This intervention can be something that is being devised de novo, invented, or something selected from the current available techniques. Now, the current available techniques, as far as the technical side of how to proceed, like for instance with the cognitive behavioral therapy, have nothing specifically Western or atheist. It's the grid behind it, the assumptions of the therapist that give it this or that color. So if you adopt the technique with using the assumptions of Islam, then immediately it becomes Islamic. But you have to have a grid showing all the background against which any knowledge coming from anywhere can be measured, and then whatever is incompatible with Islamic principles will be discarded unhesitatingly. So we come now to the necessity of grasping the principles of Islam, which are what constitutes the spirit of the law. The law itself is full of details, but the spirit of the law can be conceived by understanding and grasping the principles. Perhaps it is as well now to clarify something about the concepts of Sunnah and Bid'ah, which everybody is talking about. Whatever is Sunnah is what is in line, conforms to the principles, the spirit of religion. Whatever is Bid'ah is what is in contradiction, in opposition to the spirit of the law, to the principles. And that includes everything. Now, the literal meaning of bid'ah is something that is new, unprecedented, and innovation. So obviously there can be bid'ah hasana, which is a good innovation, and bid'ah sayyi'ah, which is a bad innovation. What makes it good or bad is its conformity with the principle, the spirit of the Islamic law. Right. But isn't now we have to explain what we mean by principles. Just to make it clear, Sunnah and Bid'ah is not just a matter of fiqh, it's not just a matter of sacred law. It's everything in the Islamic world has to be either Sunnah or Bid'ah. It's the way you talk, the way you walk, the way you eat, the way you dress, your furniture at home, the architecture, obviously, all the arts, all this, there is Sunnah, which conforms to the spirit of the law, and there is bid'ah which doesn't. It is not just a question of sacred law. No. Before we talk of principles, we have to talk about knowledge. What do we mean by knowledge? Now, knowledge is of 3 degrees. The first degree is information. You collect information, observation, experience. Now, mere information is not knowledge, it's just information. Like some of these PhD theses where the candidate collates all the information he can get his hands on, and then does a superficial analysis, guessing nowhere, draws irrelevant conclusions, and then you have this massive collection of information that is good for nothing. That's merely information. If the information becomes organized and we can bring out the relation between the various bits, then that becomes a science. Now here it becomes something that can be workable, something that can be useful. Now, if you know the principles of the science, you become a master of that science, not just a technician. If you know the principles governing science as such, material science as such, then you're on the threshold of wisdom. Once you know the place of science as science within the knowledge of the human being, the entire range of knowledge, including spiritual knowledge, then you're in the domain of principles. Principles are wisdom. They're no longer knowledge. They go one step above that and they become wisdom. وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. Wisdom is the prerogative of the sages who know about the spirit of things and they never get lost in details. Now, laws and principles go up higher and higher and become more and more comprehensive until they become truly universal. But universal principles are still relative because they are pertain to creation. The principle, properly principle, is something that is independent by itself. Something that has no need of anything else, is not limited by anything else, but controls everything else. That's the principle. So, properly speaking, the only principle is Allah. So the highest principle is Allah. And then if you say La ilaha illallah, you're denying other gods, you're one step lower. You say La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah, now you're affirming creation, you're another step lower. So as you go lower, limitations come in, conditioning comes in, and the principle becomes less comprehensive. But it's still a principle. Now, another classification of knowledge is ilm al-ijmaal wa ilm al-tafsiil. Ilm al-ijmaal, ijmaal is the sum, and tafsiil is the details. So you have the knowledge of the sum of things and the knowledge of details. The first, ilm al-ijmaal, can be called synthetic knowledge, and ilm al-tafsiil is analytic knowledge. Synthetic knowledge is what we've just been saying, La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. It's very synthetic because the people of Allah, they know that from this short sentence, they can extract all the knowledge that is available. So that's a principle which can, from which you can extract lower principles and lower principles, more relative principles as you go down. So that's synthetic knowledge. So synthetic knowledge is ilm al-ijmaal. Synthetic knowledge is the knowledge of principles. Analytic knowledge is the knowledge of details. And the knowledge of details leads to the knowledge of applications. When you come to apply the principles, you have to work out the details of how to do it. And that's knowledge of tafsiil, knowledge of details. To give an example, for instance, the soldiers, they have tactics and they have strategy. Strategy is how to the movements of the whole armies during the campaign. What is the strategic objective you want to achieve? Tactics starts at the level of a platoon, company, regiment, how to immediately engage the enemy in front of you. The details of how to do things on the ground. And grand strategy, of course, is how to use the whole war to influence international politics. So strategy is the principles of war, tactics are the details, and grand strategy are the principles of strategy. As you go up, it becomes more comprehensive. Modern science starts from the bottom up. They gather up information, either by observation or experiment, and then they try to extract laws from this information. Revealed knowledge starts from the principle and applies the principle to the information you acquire so as to make sense of them and set the limits into which they have to operate. So people who know the principles, when if you know the principles of Islam and you're a physicist, you will stop short of inventing the atomic bomb because you know what people will do with it. You will be afraid that Allah will ask you to account on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and you will stop because you have principles in your mind. If you don't have the principle, then it's a free-for-all. You can do whatever you like with the details, the applications, and apply any knowledge in a haram way, in a halal way, in a beneficial way, in a harmful way, because there are no principles governing. As far as the principles in psychology, another example is, for instance, when you study Freud, and you find that what Freud does is to ask the patient to bring out the contents of his dreams, and the more lurid they are, the better it is, and he asks for more. Now, the instructions we have from the Prophet ﷺ is if you have a bad dream, you should turn to the other side, ask protection from Allah, forget about it, and not talk about it to anybody. So what Freud is doing is the exact opposite of the Prophet's instructions. So Freud is no good. Just on account of this, that doesn't mean that you cannot take one or two useful details from here and there. But you have to be very careful because the principles governing Freud's work are not conforming to our principles as Muslims. So he must have gone wrong somewhere. Without having to study the whole corpus of Freudian writings and things, this simple explanation on how to apply the principles will give you the result already. Now, another name for principle is usul. Usul means roots. And details are furu. Furu mean branches. What has brought these things in is that nowadays people are over-involved with details and not sufficiently involved with principles. If you know the principles, if you have a good grasp of the principles, then if you try, like, for instance, you're trying to come up with something like Islamic psychotherapy, if you know the principles, you can't go wrong. If you don't know the principles, you can go wrong. So it's very important to know the principles, not just for psychology, for anything that you're involved with. even conceptual problems, things which are purely philosophical. If you know the principles, you can't go wrong. If you don't know the principles, you can go around and around in circles for years and years and never get any. Now, again, usul, their roots, and they were what constitutes wisdom or synthetic knowledge. Furu are branches, details, applications, and these are the constituents of the analytical levels of knowledge. The best way to learn a principle is to be told about it at a moment where you're receptive by somebody who's already assimilated. And if you immediately recognize how obvious it was, despite the fact that you never knew about it before, but as soon as you hear about it, you recognize that this is something obvious, you should have known about it, then that means that you've received it. The second best way is to deduce it from the available knowledge. And that's most of the time was how the Prophet taught his companions and how he left the knowledge to us. He very seldom formulated a principle in one sentence. He gave you landmarks, signs on the way. One detail here, one detail there. And if you connect the points, then the law comes out. And when you deduce it, the principle, you reduce the principle yourself, then you're not likely to forget about it or lose it after that. Of course, if you have already thought about the problem, then when Allah sends you the answer, either through somebody or through a book or through a video or through whatever, then you immediately recognize that this is what you're searching for. There's a problem here in that not everybody are receptive to the knowledge of principles. Al-ijmaal, some people are born with the brains wired up to grasp this, and some people are born with the brain wired up to understand only al-tafsiil, which is the knowledge of details. Now, in an ideal world, the people of wisdom, the people of al-ijmaal, the people of principles, would have the last word on any matter. The sages would have the last word on any matter. But unfortunately, we're not in an ideal world, and we have people such as the literalists who are utterly incapable of grasping any of the principles. They get lost in the details, and they refuse to acknowledge that there are people who are wiser than them. And that's where problems start, because they will not recognize the authority of people who are wiser than them. So what if you feel that you're not, obviously, as I said before, the difference between those who are completely in mastery of the knowledge of principles and those who get lost entirely in the knowledge of details, there are all the degrees, all the intermediate degrees. Again, 20% of this and 80% of that, 35% of this and 65% of that, and so on. If you happen to be one of those who feel difficulty in understanding the principles, then the best thing for you is to stick as near as possible to the people of principles. Then whatever they think you can understand, they will give you, and whatever, whenever you're perplexed, you can simply ask, and they'll give you the answer. Very rarely, as I said, did the Prophet give, like, for instance, when he said, "Ma min aamin illa alladhi ba'dahu sharrun minhu hatta talqaw rabbakum." This was a law, the law of history, that no year should come upon you, but the next one will be worse. He did not elaborate on that. He did not say worse in what kind. He did not say whether this deterioration will be in a straight line or in cycles. These things he said on other occasions, but on that occasion he just gave them this one law to understand. Now, what if you understand what this means? If you really understand that no year shall come upon you, but the next one will be worse, then you will be very careful at trying to change things in a sort of forceful or coercive way, because you know that things are going downwards. So any disturbance will just increase the speed of deterioration. It will not arrest the deterioration. It will create chaos, and chaos will increase the speed of deterioration. So trying to introduce reform by force in the end will lead to more chaos, and more chaos will lead to an acceleration of. So you're doing the opposite of what you set out to do because you don't know the principles. I hope this question of principles is clear now. The importance of, whenever trying to study any subject at all, going for the principles. So if you have the principles, you don't need to have all the details. If you know the principles of history like the Prophet taught us, there's a lot of knowledge there, quite a lot of knowledge. Then you don't actually need to read the newspapers or watch TV. You know what's happening without being told, because you know the rule, you know the law, you know what's going to happen, you know which groups are going to become terrorists and which are become rich and who are going to become corrupt, and you know it's you understand the wisdom of the times. When you know the principles and you encounter a new situation, you'll be immediately able to place it where it belongs on the larger map. And that applies not only to psychology and psychotherapy, but it applies to all kinds of knowledge. Very often you find that the more spiritual people are the people who grasp the principles more. They're more open to the principles, they can trust, and find that the really spiritual people, whenever you describe a situation to them, they'll come up with the law rather than analyze the situation bit by bit and then try to make it. He'll just tell you this is the law of this situation, so you understand where to place it in the map. And the opposite, people who are not at all spiritual, who have hardness of the heart, who cannot, who have no ambition to rise above themselves, are most often narrow-minded and literalists. Literalists are something like the concrete thinkers that this Swiss chap Piaget was talking about a long time ago. The concrete operational stage where you cannot go beyond thinking in material terms. It seems that their intellectual growth is usually stunted at this level because they cannot go beyond the literal meaning of the text. Now, having said this, I think this concludes the formal part of the lecture. Perhaps I should add a few things about my personal experience in psychiatry and treating Muslims. I've been working in Muslim countries for the last 40 years or so. I find that a lot of the people, before they come to me, they would have gone to the exorcists, they call them sheikh. I don't know. And the exorcist would have told them one of three things: either you are possessed, or have had Ḥasan, or the evil eye. These are the three diagnoses. They don't have the fourth diagnosis, which is mental illness. Now, In 40 years of practice, only once I met somebody whom I suspected might have been affected by one of these things. To clarify the terminology first, possession is means that the jinn is inside the person, is actually in control. The person is possessed. Obsession means that he's being harassed by a jinn that is not inside him, not possessing him, not in control. And the evil eye obviously is the influence of the Ḥasan, which is the jealous, bad feeling of a bad person, mediated through the subtle world by being by looking at the person he doesn't like. So, as I said, in 40 years, I only saw one case which I suspected might, and that was a middle-aged lady who suffered from symptoms which did not fit with any diagnostic category. I mean, we see a lot who do not fit in any particular niche. Most patients do not fit in a particular niche of diagnosis, but not to that extent. There was nothing graspable. I couldn't find anything to treat. I said, well, let's go for the worst. We treat her as depression. I gave her one antidepressant and then a second in the combination. It didn't work at all, zero result. And then the husband said, maybe she is possessed. I said, I don't think so, but I will give you the address of somebody who might help. I gave him the address, not of a professional exorcist, because these people are very, very bad. I gave him the address of a man of God who doesn't usually do these things, and was surprised to be there. And he recited some Quran over her thing, did not say that she suffered from anything, gave her some invocations to read, and sent her away. And then they disappeared from sight. A year later, she returned, and they said that they were in another city, and she was taken to a psychiatrist who found that she had developed a full-blown, typical psychotic depressive episode. And she was given electroconvulsive therapy and recovered. So even that one, the one case I suspected in 40 years of being of having something to do with the jinn, turned out to be entirely psychiatric. So I discount everything that has to do with possession and obsession in that way. As for the evil eye, no, it does happen. But what can you do? I mean, if you just try and fix the damages, that's the practical thing to do. If somebody receives an evil eye and gets a broken leg, then you can recite Quran for now to eternity, and the leg will not mend unless you reduce it properly and put it in a cast. So that's about these things that people go to the exorcist for. I don't really, in diagnosing patients, take them into consideration too much because I think they're irrelevant. Now, cognitive therapy is not something that is just clinical. If you think of the meaning of the term, not the practical implication, the meaning of the term is that you are trying to restructure the cognitive structure of somebody. And that is something that all the prophets have been doing, and all the spiritual people have been doing since the beginning of any religion. Because if you deal with the kafir, then you have to restructure his mind to become a Muslim. If you're dealing with a bad Muslim, you restructure his mind. You remove the bad assumptions, you replace them with the good assumption. And the first one to do this was obviously the Prophet ﷺ. He disciplined the companions, and the companions disciplined the people after them, the followers, and the followers disciplined the people after them. And it's still going on until now. Unfortunately, this kind of discipline, this kind of training is not easy to to use in clinical practice. It doesn't transfer very easily because in clinical practice we're dealing with something that is not spiritually pathological, but psychologically pathological. Spiritually pathological means the illnesses of the soul that prevent the spirit from being free. And although psychiatric illness does that as well, you can treat the psychiatric illness and the person is still not interested in spirituality. So these techniques that have been used by the shuyukh throughout the 14th centuries really have very little. Another thing that I would like you to be aware of is that psychiatric illness does not by itself as such prevent spirituality. I've seen some who are awliyaullah, who are people of great spirituality, who suffer from bipolar affective disorder. One of them, although these things are the exception rather than the rule, I saw one of them who was severely obsessive. He was a hoarder. You wouldn't conceive of something like this, somebody who's so obsessive that he's hoarding things all the time, and at the same time he's a saint of Allah. I've seen more than one developing a delusional disorder toward the end of their lives. Now, all of these, and then there is also the opinion that people who are hafiz of Quran never develop dementia. But I've seen at least two who are hafiz of Quran, and also people of great spirituality or toward the end of the life. The bottom line is that Allah does what He wants. Allah does what He wants with His creatures, with His servants. There are no rules to prevent Allah from doing what He wants. He wants us to know that we are weak. He wants us to know we are dependent on Him. He wants us to know that we can't do anything without Him and that He can do whatever He likes at any time. So He shows us the examples. Now these, I think, are a few bits and pieces that I wanted to tell you about from my own personal experience. So thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Cambridge Muslim College, training the next generation of Muslim thinkers.